Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by mentioning a widely shared myth. It is often claimed that we can reliably discern a postmodern narration by its fussing about itself and its lamentable subject.
Rubbish.
No, quite true.
The people who say this clearly do not read too much. For instance, it appears they have never read Balzac or Dickens, whose narrators present us with their circumstances so insistently that it almost appears pushy.
Well, come off it. You mean intrusively?
For instance, in Book 3 of Illusion Perdue, the narrator assures us how interesting we shall find the detailed explanation of promissory notes in French banking. And that is to follow a few lines further on. And I quote, "A tolerably long digression of this kind will seem all too short, and 90 out of every 100 readers shall seize with avidity upon details that possess all the piquancy of novelty, thus establishing yet once again the trust of the well-known axiom that there is nothing so little known as that which everybody is supposed to know, the law of the land to it, and of a truth for the immense majority of Frenchmen, a minute description of some part of the machinery of banking will be as interesting as any chapter of foreign travel."
Yeah, well, that's just Frenchmen.
Again, in The Splendours and Miseries of Courtesans, the narrator explains his unwillingness to go into details of Theodore Cavill's case by saying, I quote, "Though the case is a very curious one, our account of it must be brief. It is impossible to introduce a long digression at the climax of a narrative already so much prolonged, since its only interest is in so far as it concerns Jacques Collin, the vertebral column, so to speak, which by its sinister persistency connects Le Père Goriot with Illusion Perdue and Illusion Perdue with this study. And indeed, the reader's imagination will be able to work out the obscure case, which at this moment was causing great uneasiness to the jury of the sessions before whom Theodore Calvi had been tried." Enough of Balzac, though. I should think you're quite sated of that literary constructeur, the manipulateur of objects, as was appositely pointed out by Beckett.
Yes, we are. No, we're not.
Let me quote. "It often happens that certain actions of human life seem, literally speaking, improbable though actual. Is not this because we constantly omit to turn the stream of psychological light upon our impulsive determinations and fail to explain the subtle reasons mysteriously conceived in our minds which impelled them? Perhaps Eugenie's deep passion should be analysed in its most delicate fibres, for it became, scoffers might say, a malady which influenced her whole existence. Many people prefer to deny results rather than estimate the force of ties and links and bonds which secretly join one fact to another in the moral order. Here, therefore, Eugenie's past life will offer to observers of human nature an explanation of her naive want of reflection and the suddenness of the emotions which overflowed her soul." Balzac once again, I'm afraid.
Just as I was going to say.
I see it this way. Here, the narrator explicitly takes guard against the risk that his picturing of Eugenie's sudden flame for her cousin Charles might be perceived as improbable, or perhaps as narratively skimpy. After assuring us that in this respect the novel is all right, he charges such an assessment would indict the reader as superficial and incapable or unwilling to make the intellectual effort required by cases such as this.
Well, I won't stand for that.
Nor me.
Remarks such as these present the narrator as a responsible professional with full control over his affairs, knowledgeable as to what criteria will be used to assess his achievement, and capable of defending it from possible criticism. The narration itself then proves the narrator to be an insightful observer, a man of wit, a connoisseur of life, an expert in numerous disciplines, and so on. Now, the question is, should we ascribe this boasting to Balzac himself, or to the narrator as a literary construct?
To Balzac, in person.
Nonsense. To the construct.
I am strongly inclined to say the former. Literary theory claims in one voice, or almost, that it is always a sin to confuse the narrator with the empirical author. The question is, however, what shall we lose as readers if we allow that it is Balzac the man presenting himself here as knowledgeable about the law, banking, the business of literature and the papers, the history of the Restoration, and so on? I am in agreement with my learned colleague, Professor Walsh of the University of York.
Oh, we certainly don't need any ideas from there.
I agree with Professor Walsh that the heterodiegetic narrator is simply identical with the empirical author.
Yorkshire blabber.
On another point, in Cousin Pon, it is said that a certain schmuck, just like all good pianists, I quote, a German like the eminent Liszt and the great Mendelssohn and Steibelt and Dussek and Mayer and Mozart, etc. This muddled list is concluded by Clara Wieck.
She wasn't a bad pianist anyway.
Is it Balzac himself, or rather a textual construct, the narrator, who is so lamentably confused about nationalities and induces the reader into error?
Both.
My own intuition tells me, as above, the one to blame is the author, and Walsh is right.
I'll go off to York then.
Nonetheless, in spite of these excesses, the narrator, that is to say Balzac, presents himself as a broad-minded and witty companion whom one would gladly invite to dinner.
I wouldn't.
Nor me, neither.
We find here a prominent case of what I call narrator in good shape. Let us spend a moment over his potential and his limitations. The theoreticians of fiction will allege that no narrator of a fictional story, no matter whether in good shape or bad shape, is ever capable of telling a story that takes place in a complete world and is acted out by complete persons, fully determinate beings like anybody present.
All right, no need to be personal.
Yeah, you better leave me out of that.
Since